I wasn't an orphan, but my family made me one, in that hospital hallway. My name is Ava, and I was 17 when I watched my mother and uncle write off my dying grandfather, like a bad business deal. They walked away, leaving me, the family's black sheep, with his impossible medical bills and their final cutting words about my father's disgrace. They saw a burden and a bad investment. But as I clutched the intake forms, a different kind of fire began to burn inside me. They thought they were leaving me to fail. They had no idea they were creating a weapon. Before I share the rest of my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button, because if you've ever had to fight against all odds for your family, trust me, you're going to want to hear what happens next. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and despair, the kind that clings to your skin and won't let go. I stood by my grandfather's bed, the beep of the heart monitor, a cruel metronome. Elias Vance, the man who'd taught me how to hold a wrench before I could hold a pencil, lay still, his face a map of wrinkles under the harsh fluorescent light. The doctor's words hit like a sledgehammer. Massive stroke, less than a 10% chance of meaningful recovery, long-term care costs that could bankrupt a small nation. I was 17, barely holding it together, my hands gripping the hospital bed's railing to keep from collapsing. My mother, Cynthia, stood to my left, her arms crossed, her lips a thin line. Uncle Robert, all polished cufflinks and cold eyes, stood beside her. My cousin Gregory, with his finance bro smirk, leaned against the wall scrolling his phone. No one cried. No one even looked at Grandpa. The doctor left and the silence was louder than the machines. Robert spoke first, his voice clipped, like he was closing a business deal. "We're not throwing good money after bad into a black hole. It's irrational." He adjusted his tie as if the room's grief was an inconvenience. Cynthia's eyes flicked to me, sharp and accusing. "He's lived his life, Ava. We have to be practical. Your father already cost this family enough." Her words cut deeper than the doctor's prognosis. My father. The disgrace. The man whose name was a curse in our family, whose shadow I'd been running from my whole life. I was the black sheep, the reminder of his failure, the kid they tolerated but never loved. I wanted to scream, to demand what he'd done to deserve their scorn, but my throat was a knot of rage and hurt. They didn't argue or debate. They just exchanged glances, those knowing looks that shut me out. Robert patted my shoulder, his hand heavy with condescension. "You'll understand when you're older, Ava." Cynthia's lips twitched, not a smile, but something colder. Gregory didn't even look up from his phone. Then they turned and left, their expensive shoes clicking on the linoleum, echoing down the hall like a death knell. I stood there alone, clutching my half-empty wallet and the hospital intake forms. The weight of it all, Grandpa's life, my father's shame, their rejection, pressed down until my knees buckled. I slid to the floor outside the ICU, the cold tile biting through my jeans. I didn't cry. I couldn't. It wasn't sadness that paralyzed me. It was the calculated cruelty of their departure, the way they'd written us both off without a second thought. I was nothing to them, and now neither was Grandpa. The hallway was quiet except for the distant hum of a janitor's mop. I stared at the forms in my hand, the numbers blurring, costs I couldn't fathom, a future I couldn't afford. But I couldn't leave him. Not like they did. I'd promised him, years ago in his workshop, that I'd always have his back. He'd smiled then, his eyes crinkling, and said, "You're tougher than steel, Ava." I didn't feel tough now. I felt like a kid, small and scared, with no one left to fight for but a dying man. The next morning, I emptied my college savings, every penny I'd scraped from scholarships and waitressing, into Elias's hospital bills. It wasn't enough, not even close, but it was a start. I took a second job, an overnight janitorial shift at Allegheny General, the same hospital where Grandpa lay. The irony wasn't lost on me, scrubbing floors to keep him breathing. My days became a blur of classes, shifts, and hospital visits. My hands were raw from bleach, my eyes heavy from sleepless nights, but I kept going, I had to. Grandpa's workshop became my refuge. It was a crumbling relic in Pittsburgh's Rust Belt, all grease and steel, filled with lathes, blueprints, and the ghost of his laughter. When I was a kid, he'd let me tinker there, teaching me how to turn a bolt, how to read a schematic. Now I cleaned it obsessively, organizing tools, wiping down surfaces, like I could bring him back by preserving his space. His old design notebooks were my lifeline. pages of precise sketches and equations, his handwriting a steady anchor in my storm. At night I'd sit by his bed, reading those manuals aloud. The technical jargon was a strange lullaby, words like torque and tensile strength filling the silence. I'd tell him about the workshop, how I'd gotten his old lathe running again, its hum a small victory. He didn't respond, not really, but I kept talking. It was all I had. Months dragged on. My life was a treadmill of exhaustion, study, scrub, visit, repeat. My classmates moved on to dorm parties and internships. I moved between hospital wards and the workshop, a ghost in my own life. But one night something shifted. I was rambling about fixing a jammed gear when Grandpa's finger twitched. Just a flicker, barely noticeable, but it hit me like a lightning bolt. I froze, my voice shaking as I whispered, "You heard me, didn't you?" No answer, but that twitch was enough. A spark of hope in the endless dark. I kept going, fueled by that spark. One evening, bone-tired and wiping down his workbench, I found something odd. A sequence of numbers and the word guardian etched into the wood. It was faint, hidden under years of grime, but it felt like a message. I didn't know what it meant, but it was his, and that was enough. I traced the carving with my finger, the wood rough under my skin, and felt a pull, like the first thread of a story I was meant to unravel. Hope is a dangerous thing. It makes you reckless. One morning Grandpa woke up, not fully, but enough. His eyes, cloudy but alive, found mine. His voice was a rasp, barely audible. The will is not the whole story. Guardian is the key. He pressed a small, ornate key into my palm, his hand trembling with effort. Then he was gone again, sinking back into silence. I clutched the key, its edges biting into my skin, my heart pounding with a mix of hope and dread. He was still in there, fighting, and he'd given me something, a clue, a purpose. But hope doesn't pay bills, and the world doesn't stop for miracles. Word got back to my family that I was funding Grandpa's care. Uncle Robert showed up at the workshop unannounced, his BMW gleaming in the cracked parking lot. He stood in the doorway, his suit out of place among the oil stains. "Ava, this is noble, but you're being sentimental," he said, his voice dripping with fake concern. "You're destroying your future for a memory. My father wouldn't have wanted this." His eyes roamed the workshop, lingering on the fireproof safe in the corner. I caught it, that flicker of greed, and my stomach twisted. He left, but the damage was done. Soon after, my parts supplier canceled my credit, muttering about financial risks. A repair contract I'd been counting on fell through, the client vague and apologetic. It wasn't coincidence. It was them. Robert, Cynthia, maybe Gregory, tightening the screws. I felt their invisible hands pushing me toward failure, just like they'd always said I would. I was unraveling. The bills piled up, a tower of numbers I couldn't climb. My landlord left voicemails about the workshop's rent. I barely slept, my dreams a mix of Grandpa's voice and my father's shadow. One night, staring at the silent phone, I held the key he'd given me. It was cold, heavy with questions. Was it hope or just another dead end? I was so tired, so close to giving up, that I almost didn't care. Almost. 2 years had passed, and I was a shadow of myself, moving through life like a machine. My days were a grind. Double shifts at the hospital, scrubbing floors until my knuckles bled, then hours in Grandpa's workshop, fixing whatever small jobs I could scrounge. Elias was stable, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of the machines, but he hadn't spoken again. The key he'd given me hung around my neck, a constant weight, a reminder of a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. I lived on instant noodles and black coffee. My world shrunk to the hospital's antiseptic halls and the workshop's grease-stained walls. But something was growing in that grind. A reputation. I'd taught myself enough from Grandpa's notebooks to take on repair jobs. Local mechanics, small factories, even a few farmers started bringing me their broken machines. They called me Vance's girl, a title that warmed me despite the exhaustion. I wasn't just Ava, the screw-up's daughter. I was the one who could fix a busted hydraulic pump or rethread a stripped bolt. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a sliver of pride in a life that felt like it was slipping away. The family didn't let up. Gregory showed up one day, all fake smiles and slick hair, claiming he wanted to check in. He poked around the workshop, asking about my clients, my finances, offering advice I didn't ask for. "You're running yourself into the ground, Ava," he said, his eyes darting to the safe in the corner. I didn't trust his concern for a second. A week later, the city hit me with a safety complaint. Anonymous, of course. The inspection cost me time and money I didn't have, and I knew exactly who was behind it. They weren't just ignoring me now, they were trying to break me. I was drowning. The workshop's rent was overdue, and the hospital bills were a mountain I couldn't climb. I'd lie awake at night, the key burning against my skin, wondering if I was fighting for Grandpa or just proving them right, that I was destined to fail. One night, sleep-deprived and staring at a stack of unpaid bills, I almost gave up. I was ready to walk away, to let the workshop go, to let them win. Then I found it. Hidden in the spine of Grandpa's old design ledger was a photograph. A single pristine image of my father, young and proud, standing next to a younger Robert and Elias. They were in front of a massive steel structure, a city project from 1998. On the back, in Grandpa's meticulous handwriting, were the words, Project Nightingale, 1998. My heart stopped. It wasn't just a photo, it was a piece of the puzzle, a thread tied to the key, to Guardian, to everything. I clutched it, my hands shaking, and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about keeping Grandpa alive, it was about my father's name, about the truth they'd buried. I wasn't done yet. Grandpa died quietly 7 years after they'd left him to rot. I was there, holding his hand, his skin cool and fragile under mine. The machines went silent, and so did the world. I didn't sob or scream, my grief was a heavy, private thing, like a stone in my chest. I'd kept my promise, I'd fought for him when no one else would. But God, it hurt. The funeral was small, just a handful of old machinists and neighbors who remembered Elias Vance as more than a name. I arranged it all, scraping together what little I had left. My family showed up, a parade of crocodile tears. Cynthia wore a black veil, like she was auditioning for a tragedy. Robert's face was a mask of solemnity, and Gregory muttered condolences that felt like ash in my mouth. They didn't belong here. Not after what they'd done. I stood apart, my hands in my pockets, the key around my neck, a silent accusation. Back at the workshop, I was sorting through Grandpa's things, old tools, faded blueprints, when I caught Gregory by the safe. He was prying at the lock, his face flushed with guilt when he saw me. "Ava, I was just..." he stammered, but I cut him off. "What are you looking for, Gregory?" My voice was ice, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Cynthia stormed in, then her composure gone. "Where is it, Ava? Just give us the box from the Guardian safe. This foolishness has gone on long enough." The world tilted. They hadn't come back for Grandpa, they hadn't come for the inheritance. They'd come for something hidden, something they'd waited 7 years to claim. All my sacrifice, my sleepless nights, my bleeding hands, they'd seen it as an inconvenience, a delay in their plan. My grief burned into rage, white-hot and sharp. I wasn't just the black sheep anymore. I was a threat, and they knew it. The lawyer's office was a battlefield, all polished mahogany and tense silence. I sat alone on one side of the table, my family on the other. Robert with his clenched jaw, Cynthia with her manicured nails tapping, Gregory avoiding my eyes. Mr. Davies, Grandpa's lawyer, sat at the head, his face unreadable. They thought this was a formality, that they'd walk away with everything. I could see it in their smugness, the way they leaned back in their chairs. Davies started reading the will, his voice steady. It was brutal. To Cynthia and Robert, Grandpa left $1 each, for the price of their practicality. The rest, the house, the workshop, his savings, his stock portfolio, every patent and design, went to me. "To my beloved granddaughter Ava Marshall," Davies read, "the only one who understood that legacy is not inherited but earned." The room exploded. Robert slammed his fist on the table, accusing me of manipulating a dying man. Cynthia's voice was a shriek, threatening to contest the will, her face red with disbelief. Gregory just stared at the floor, his hands shaking. I sat still, my heart pounding, but I didn't flinch. I'd spent years under their scorn, I could handle their rage. Then Davies cleared his throat and played a video, a final addendum from Grandpa. The screen flickered, and there he was, frail but clear-eyed, his voice firm. "To my children," he said, looking straight into the camera, "if you're contesting this, know that Ava possesses the contents of the Guardian safe. She has my full blessing to use them as she sees fit to protect my true legacy, truth and honor. The choice is now hers, not yours." The silence was deafening. Their faces drained of color, and for the first time I saw them for what they were, small, desperate. afraid. The power had shifted. I wasn't their victim anymore. I was the one holding the key, the one with the truth. And they knew it. The air outside the lawyer's office was thick with the threat of rain, but the real storm was behind me. My family cornered me in the parking lot, their masks of civility gone. Robert's face was inches from mine, with his breath hot with desperation. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Ava," he hissed. "Hand it over, or we'll drag your name through the mud. You'll be the gold digger who conned a senile old man." Cynthia's eyes were venomous, and Gregory just stood there, his usual smirk replaced by a nervous twitch. I clutched the key around my neck, my heart hammering, but I didn't back down. "You don't scare me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. They stormed off, their threats lingering like smoke. That night, I woke to the sound of glass breaking at the workshop. My heart leapt into my throat as I grabbed a wrench and crept downstairs. The back window was shattered, but whoever it was had fled. Amateurs, probably hired by Robert. It was the final push I needed. I was done running, done doubting. I took the key and the Project Nightingale photograph, my hands trembling with purpose. The numbers etched on Grandpa's workbench, those cryptic digits under Guardian, had to be the safe's combination. I knelt before the heavy fireproof safe, my breath shallow, and punched in the code. The lock clicked and the door swung open. Inside wasn't money or gold, but a stack of files and a small hand-machined metal box. I spread the papers across the workbench, my eyes scanning frantically. The files detailed Project Nightingale, a 1998 city infrastructure contract worth millions. There were forged documents, laundered payment records, internal memos, proof that Robert, with Gregory's help, had framed my father for selling proprietary designs to a competitor. My father, a man of stubborn pride, had taken his own life rather than face the disgrace. And Cynthia, my mother, had chosen to believe the lie to protect the family's wealth and status. The metal box held the final piece. My father's original blueprints, untouched, his handwriting unmistakable. It was the truth, preserved like a relic. I sat there, surrounded by the evidence of their betrayal, and everything clicked. The whispers, the shame, the years of being the black sheep. It wasn't my father's failure. It was their greed, their lies. The pain of it hit me like a wave, not just for me, but for him, for the life he'd lost. I clutched the blueprints, my tears smudging the ink, and felt a clarity so sharp it hurt. The black sheep wasn't me. It was them, the wolves who'd torn our family apart. Grandpa had known, and he'd left me the weapon to make it right. I could have destroyed them. The files were a loaded gun, enough to send Robert and Gregory to jail, to smear Cynthia's name across every headline in Pittsburgh. But as I sat in the workshop, the weight of the truth in my hands, I realized revenge wasn't what Grandpa wanted. He'd left me the safe not to burn them down, but to build something better. So I called a meeting. We sat around the same mahogany table in Davies's office, the air thick with tension. Robert's jaw was tight, Cynthia's eyes darted nervously, and Gregory wouldn't meet my gaze. I laid the Nightingale files and the metal box on the table, watching their faces pale. "Here's the deal," I said, my voice calm but unyielding. "You issue a public statement clearing my father's name. You fund a memorial scholarship in his honor. Or I take this to the district attorney and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Your choice." They didn't fight. They couldn't. The evidence was ironclad, and they knew it. A week later the story ran, not of their fraud, but of my father's vindication. The Post-Gazette called it a tragic miscarriage of justice corrected after decades. The scholarship, named for John Marshall, would fund engineering students in the Rust Belt. I didn't take a dime of their money, and I cut them out of my life for good. Their legacy was their shame. Mine was something else entirely. A year later, the workshop was alive again. I'd turned it into the headquarters of the Elias and John Marshall Foundation, a nonprofit for at-risk kids in Pittsburgh's fading industrial heart. We taught them to weld, to read blueprints, to build things that lasted. I stood in the workshop, watching a teenager named Marcus operate the lathe, his hands steady as he shaped a piece of steel. He grinned when it came out perfect, and I felt a warmth I hadn't known in years. My hands were still stained with grease, my scars a map of the fight, but my spirit was whole. I wound Grandpa's old pocket watch, its familiar tick, a quiet companion. The wealth he'd left me wasn't the money or the patents. It was the skills he'd taught me, the resilience I'd forged, the honor I'd reclaimed. I'd taken the ashes of betrayal and built something good, something lasting. As Marcus laughed, showing his work to another kid, I smiled, a real peaceful smile. I wasn't the haunted girl scrubbing floors anymore. I was Ava Marshall, and I'd found my purpose. My inheritance wasn't the money, it was the resilience forged in those 7 years of struggle. If my story teaches you anything, let it be this. Legacy is not what you are given, but what you build when you have nothing left. Your value is not defined by those who try to tear you down, but by your own refusal to break. So, when you face your own battles, ask yourself not what you stand to lose, but what kind of legacy you are strong enough to earn. What will your story be?